Hey y'all, welcome to today's show. We are actually going to begin wrapping up the Ten Commandments today. Now I say begin because although we will cover the Ninth and Tenth Commandment, there is so much related teaching and information that Father Spirago is going to tell us. So much of it gets left out in modern catecheses. So much of it is almost exclusive to Catholicism, although it should be universal, because a lot of people just don't know stuff. And each generation we seem to know less than the generation before, which is one reason why I like to go back to old books like Father Spirago's exhaustive explanation of the Catechism, which was published in about 1890 or so. But as usual, we will start with a couple of questions and answers from the book Radio Replies, written by, as I always tell you, I've probably told you this 10 times now, the two priests in the, 1930s began taking questions and answers from non-Catholics, usually very anti-Catholics, over radio. And these books are compilation. They're just wonderful. And for the past two episodes, a communist has really been grilling them, and he has a big problem with any wealth held by the church. And in his first question today, he says, can you blame governments for confiscating the property of the church and giving it back to the people? And they say, yes, the government has no claim whatsoever on private property, unless in extreme necessity it has to confiscate or appropriate from all citizens alike. Our Catholic people voluntarily erect permanent buildings for the needs of their religion. Others have just as much money, in fact more than Catholics. If the government confiscates the useful results of Catholic generosity with surplus earnings, then it has the right to confiscate the surplus money of everyone else, above all when it is not put to good use. As for giving it back to the people, there is no church on earth which can compare with the Catholic Church for the number of charitable institutions. She has more hospitals for the sick, orphanages for destitute children, homes for the aged and dying, for the deaf and dumb, and etc., than all other churches put together. And the person says, the workers of the world do not admit that large edifices and tracts of land are necessary to do the Lord's work. So, workers of the world, an obvious communist. They used to call them the Wobblies, if I remember correctly, the WOW. They were communist activists who were very big in the union movement. They answer, the opinion of the one doing the work is more value than of the onlooker. The church knows that these temporal things are necessary. Anyway, these properties have been honestly and laboriously acquired by charitable-minded citizens and are held in their name and are not actually theirs only because they have freely resigned ownership of them to God. They certainly do not belong to the clergy, and it is quite unjust for other citizens to talk of confiscating them. Remember that besides beautifying the cities of the world, the greater part of the expenses of these churches, cathedrals, institutions has gone in wages to the workers. That's right. A lot of unionized workers actually build a lot of those cathedrals and such. The person says, the rich belong to your church because it's convenient. And they answer, the poor who belong to the Catholic Church far exceed the number of the rich. As for convenience, the Catholic Church is the most inconvenient of all to live up to. Although I admit it is convenient to die in, since it fits one so well for one's meeting with God. The person says, each convert you make means more revenue, but where is the advantage to the convert? And they answer, if the new convert did contribute to the support of his religion, that would already be an advantage to him. If Christ rightly commended the poor widow who gave her mite to the temple, but even if a convert could give nothing, he would be nonetheless welcome. The Catholic Church never wants anyone for what he will bring her, but for what she can give him, absolution for his sins. Christ is his Savior and the guest of his heart in Holy Communion, relief after his death and heaven in the end. It is all very much to the advantage of the convert. And the communist continues, there are thousands living on the gullibility of the poor. And they answer, there are thousands giving their lives to the service of God and their fellow men making a return, but not by giving their lives, but by giving a small percentage of their temporal goods. One's life is more precious and a greater gift than a portion of that life's earnings. And the guy says, everybody's after riches, including religious teachers. And they say that is not true. The thousands of priests, brothers, and nuns who have vowed poverty in the religious orders of the Catholic Church never receive a penny personally in wages. They renounce the possession and administration of property, and are given merely such shelter, food, and clothing as are absolutely necessary. Those priests who do not undertake this obligation of poverty are entitled to such a revenue as the people provide in return for a life work on their behalf. All right, we'll wrap it up on that one for today. The communists will go on for several more questions. Communists really hate the church, Christianity in general, but especially the Catholic Church. So we can expect this to be quite contentious. But we'll go on to the Ninth Commandment. Now, Father Spirago does not spend any time on the Ninth Commandment. He says, see what is said concerning this under the Sixth Commandment, and respecting the sacrament of matrimony, and also the words of our Lord in Matthew 5:28, St. Paul, 1 Corinthians 6. So I refer you back to our show on the Sixth Commandment, and it was all covered very extensively. And now we will get on to the Tenth Commandment. In the Tenth Commandment, God forbids us to endeavor to possess ourselves of the property of another by unlawful means. So coveting leads to theft, and theft and coveting are both forbidden. So that's what we're talking about here. And in discussing this commandment, the 10th, you'll find out exactly why socialists and communists hate the Catholic Church so much. They are actually in exact opposition to several of the commandments, especially though against covetousness and envy and theft. That's kind of what they're all based on, is saying they have a right to someone else's property even though they did nothing to earn it. In God's sight, the will is equivalent to the deed. Evil desires are sinful as well as evil deeds, and the act is accomplished in will. Therefore, transgressions of this commandment must not be omitted in confession. Under the topic of socialism, which he preaches against in this writing about the 10th Commandment, in our own day, a large proportion of the so-called socialists or social democrats aim at depriving their fellow man of their private property by unjust means. Social democracy, or the rule of the people, proposes to reconstruct human society. It is of recent origin, being first started in Germany in 1840, of course, 1840, and propagated some 10 years later by the notorious Karl Marx. In 1862, Lassalle was very successful in spreading socialistic doctrines, so much so that in 1878 a special law was passed for the suppression of socialism. Associations and meetings were prohibited, publications advocating its principles were seized, and the leading agitators were banished from several of the large towns. From that time forward, the work of propagation was carried on covertly. In the workshops and club meetings being held in the woods, and pamphlets circulated privately. In 1880, a socialistic congress was held in Zurich, attended by members from all the countries of Europe, to arrange a general program for the universal upheaval of society and subversion of the existing order of things. Since the system has made steady progress and it has assumed a revolutionary character. Those who resort to open acts of violence in order to accelerate the disintegration of society are called anarchists. Switzerland is a hotbed of socialism, and there the principal organs of society are printed. Socialism has gained ground chiefly in the continent of Europe. That was, of course, very true in the late 1800s, leading to the Bolshevik Revolution and so much more. But now it's at least as popular, communism, socialism, and anarchy, and under the guise of anti-fascism, which is ridiculous because socialism and communism and Nazism and everything is inherently fascist. There is no room for the individual whatsoever. All properties must be held in common, and everyone must believe and think the same thing or be punished by the state. That's the very definition, but of course they're too dumb to know that. The fundamental principle of socialism is all property has been unjustly acquired. Consequently, in the new republic, no one is to possess any personal property, but is to be provided for out of the public funds. Everyone must work, and with the proceeds of his labor purchase what he needs. In the new republic of the extreme socialists, there is to be neither the ordinance of religion nor the institutions of law. These men openly declare themselves to be atheists, and they say religion concerns the individual alone. They are what he calls Republicans, which means they worship the republic or the state, not God. Different use of the same term in different eras. In the intercourse of man and woman is to take the place of wedlock, and yes, they've been dedicated to destroying marriage all along, and just recently they had a Black Lives Matter said that they really weren't that concerned about black stuff or racial equality or whatever. They wanted to destroy the family as their main goal. It hasn't changed. This is Karl Marx's goal, and it's now Bernie Sanders' goal, and all this trans crap. The children are to belong not to their parents, but to the state. Again, look at all this trans crap. To be educated at the public expense, a public kitchen is to supersede the domestic hearth. Prisons would not be needed, for there would be no criminals, since all crime comes from the possession of private property. Notice all these George Soros-backed DAs that refuse to prosecute criminals. These principles, and of course Black Lives Matter and all that, the riots, nobody got punished for them. Murders, rapes, thefts, arsons, nobody got punished. These principles have spread chiefly among the irreligious who care only for the gratification of their appetites, and the lower orders, the proletariat, who in the division of property have nothing to lose and nothing at all to gain. They are mostly held by certain ones of the laboring class who have been thrown by peculiar instances into the arms of socialism. Well, those people rarely labor anymore. In fact, the socialists and communists in our country tend to be the highly educated, most wealthy members of our society. Let's see if I say that again. The most highly educated and most wealthy members of our society, and those on government assistance, welfare, and Medicaid and all that, food stamps. That's where you're going to find them. Those who actually work for a living, the laboring classes, are not anymore. That's why, regardless what the union leaders do in endorsing Kamala Harris or something, the union members are going to vote for Trump because they know his interests are their interests. The origin and development of socialism is chiefly to be ascribed in the increasing poverty of the working classes, the greed of gain and immoderate craving of enjoyment among the rich, and finally the decrease of religious feeling in all classes of society. I think here Father Sprague makes an excellent point. It is valid from an economics perspective. Remember, my background's in economics. It is valid in a societal, sociology way of looking at things. It's very valid in Catholic teaching that industrialization was quite disruptive, and that one of the main causes for the fast growth of communism was the workers being taken advantage of by factory owners and mill owners and coal mine operators and such as that, et cetera, et cetera. No doubt about that. Unbridled greed is wrong, whether it's the greed of a mill owner making people work long hours in bad conditions for low pay so he can make as much money as possible, or it's the greed of a socialist or communist that gets a government position and then tries to take everybody's money from them. Both are equally wrong, actually, and they both lead to inequality and abuse. And, the Catholic position is actually the only moral position. As in the human body, disorders for the most part originate in the stomach, so discontent among the people generally arises from material want. The prevailing destitution among the lower orders is partly due to the employment of machinery. Machines can produce in a few days more than 100 workmen can in a month, and goods can be manufactured at a far cheaper rate by machinery than when made by hand. Consequently, hundreds are thrown out of employment. Through the introduction of machinery, wealth is accumulated in the hands of the manufacturers, and the number of poor and discontented has increased from day to day, swelling the ranks of socialism. The employers, striving to make larger profits, in many cases do not treat their work people according to the maxims of the gospel. They reduce their wages to a scanty pittance, P-A-T-T-A-N-C-E, pittance, the market value of labor being so low. They require them to work for a lengthened period. They heed not the bodily health of those whom they employ, and even destroy their sense of religion and morality. These and other evils naturally have the effect of rendering the workman irreligious and discontented. Factory hands employed constantly in working machinery are apt to lose their mental vigor and independence. They perform their tasks mechanically and are easily beguiled and misled. The exhaustion produced by long hours of labor disinclines them to raise their hearts to God, thus they neglect their prayers. The wretched state of their homes, where several families live crowded together on account of poverty caused by the low rate of wages, adds to their moral degradation. Well, you may say, well, look what government did in America to lift these people out of poverty. Well, look what the socialists and communists in our government are doing to flood the country with low-wage, illegal immigrant labor, who will live in exact poverty as Father Sparago just described, and to increase lawlessness. At the heart of it, they're always trying to destroy. You can call it Western society, you can call it Christendom, you can call it just Christian society, Christianity in general, but especially the Catholic Church. And why else do you let crime run rampant on your streets? You're trying to destroy something. Tim Walz loved when his major cities were on fire, the BLM riots. He said he loved smelling the burning tires out the window. They want to destroy the entire system and put in a demand system, a communist, socialist, fascist system that they'll control. Like the old song by The Who, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. All they want to do is replace the factory owners of the early 1900s, the Rockefellers and Carnegies and all that, with them as bureaucrats. They're still going to make everybody poor and in far worse condition because we won't have the family and religion or property that we can pass on or enjoy, grow food on, live on. That Klaus Schwab, you will own nothing and like it. No, what if you don't want to not? What if you don't like it? He's not giving you the choice, right? What if, me, I grew up on a farm. If I won the lottery tomorrow or sold a ton of books or something, first thing I do, buy acreage, have a farm. In their system, that's not an option. You can be a tenant on that farm, but you'll make no profits from your labor. You'll work as hard as you can, work yourself to death. The guy beside you will do nothing and you get paid the same amount. Meanwhile, because they don't have market equity, market efficiency, I guess I should say, most of the food's going to rot. There's no incentive for, anyway, okay, I'm not going to get into an economics talk. We'll get back to this. But remember, communism, socialism, progressivism, Nazism, liberalism, liberal Democrats, social democrats, leftists, whatever you want to call it, are inherently opposed to Catholicism, to Christianity in general, and to human nature, because human nature was designed by God and their system is designed by Satan. So, all right, so, moreover, the sight of the rich man's greed or money on the one hand and his extravagant expenditure and love of luxury on the other excites envy of the poor man and arouses in him the desire to satisfy his idea of happiness at the cost of the capitalist. Thus God punishes the rich in the way they have sinned. The socialist is the scourge wherewith he chastises them. In the present day, the Christian faith is more and more undermined by irreligious press, by godless associations, notably the Freemasons. Freemasons have been very much behind communism all along. And don't ever fall into this, it's rich versus poor ideology that the communists promote. Just look at who are the most powerful, wealthy people in the world. George Soros, Klaus Schwab. Look at how Joe Biden went to government, never worked a private sector job in his life, on a very modest salary and ends up with millions. So they just can't figure out how all this money came to them from the Chinese for no apparent reason. Nancy Pelosi, one of the richest, actually mafia families in the country, became a socialist Democrat. We could go on down that list. The Kennedys left. Ted Kennedy was actually, according to the Venona documents, a Soviet agent. So, yeah. John Kerry. These are very, very, very wealthy people. Very, very, very wealthy people. Gosh, we can go down to some of the Rockefellers have always been behind this stuff. We can get into the what's that wealthy Jewish family from France that Rothschilds. That was the name I was trying to come up with. Always been very behind left-wing socialist politics. Wow. I mean, yeah. I mean, literally those titans of industry that were causing all that inequality were also the ones funding the communists and socialists. So anyway, and still are to this day. I mean, look at the money behind. I mean, go to the Tides Foundation. Look at who was funding Acorn before it was dissolved. Yeah, big time. So anyway, in the present day, the Christian faith is more and more undermined by irreligious press, by godless associations, notably the Freemasons. And all of our presidents, except maybe two, have been members of the Masonic order. Don't ever forget that. And in some lands, by anti-Christian legislation, witness the exclusion of religious instruction from schools. What wonder if the belief in God and a future life grows from Him, the divine commandments are unheeded, and the people craving for happiness in this life seek to wrest His wealth from their richer neighbor. In other words, if you don't believe in God, why shouldn't you steal from somebody? If the dangers wherewithin socialism threatens us are to be averted, the condition of the laboring class must be ameliorated, the rich must be liberal toward the poor, and religion must gain her place in the hearts of the people. See, that's the ultimate answer. Coercive measures will do no more good to socialists than random blows will correct a naughty child. If anything is to be done for him, it must be done through kindness. Above all, the employer must deal with his work people according to the principle of Christianity and justice. Kettler is right when he says, if for one day we all acted in conformity with the teaching of the gospel, all social evils would be at once swept away. The employer must pay his men properly, that is, their wages must be sufficient to support a Christian family suitably to their station, provided they are thrifty, industrious, and virtuous. The position of the workman must be secured. He must not be treated as chattel, only to be employed as long as a good profit is to be made out of him. And the workman pays taxes. He is entitled to the privilege of the franchise. In other words, the workman pays taxes. He should be able to vote. I would go so far as to say, unless one pays taxes or is a landowner, one should not be able to vote. But that's just me. That's just what our founding fathers thought, Who were they to say anything? They only wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. As the workman pays opportunities of improving his mind should be afforded him by the institutions of libraries, evening classes, and formation of working men's clubs, which the Holy Father strongly advocates. One such was the Knights of Columbus. It was one of the reasons it was founded. That and to provide insurance for Catholics like the Masons and Moose Lodges and such were providing for their members. Legislation must also, I think Oddfellows was one. Masons and Oddfellows, I think, were the two big ones back in the early 1900s. Legislation must also interfere to prevent the undue growth of the proletariat through the absorption of lesser industries by the manufacturers. That means actually be against monopolies. It's a really good position to have. It was once a Catholic position, and now no one ever talks about it except Donald Trump, And the accumulation of capital in the hands of a few plutocrats. The rich ought, as the apostle says, to give easily and communicate to others. 1 Timothy 6:18. Now more than ever the rich are bound to give alms, otherwise they will be righteously judged. But religion affords the most effectual means of combating socialism. Social democracy is too often nothing but the absence of religious belief. Its chief dogma is the non-existence of God and of a future life. Its chief commandment is the gratification of the senses. Moreover, religion alone can give to the poor the spirit of contentment, so essential to their happiness. Some of the socialistic theories could not possibly realize, while others might indeed be carried out, but they would be attended by fatal consequences. Now, again, remember, this is before the Bolshevik Revolution. We would soon see exactly what it leads to. 200 million deaths of the people that are supposed to be cared for by that socialistic government, not including the enemies or all the abortions or etc., but deaths of their own citizens at the hands of the government they're revolting in favor of. The universal equality which socialists propose to bring about is an utterly impracticable idea, especially in regard to property. For if the state apportioned to everyone the exact amount required for his livelihood, One more probable than that one would spend it all, and another put a little bit by, save a bit. Thus, an inequality would immediately arise. And to enforce the surrender of a man's savings would be sheer tyranny. The same endless variety which we see in nature exists among mankind. Differences of age, of sex, of health, of physical power, and mental endowments, and above all, character and manners cannot be effaced, and from these, differences of position and possessions are inseparable. Just as in an army all the soldiers cannot be officers, and nor all privates, so all members of society cannot stand at the same level. Some must manage the business of the state or occupy themselves in military affairs, and they must naturally hold a higher rank than other members of the state because they work more exclusively for the common weal or well-being. The happiness of socialist dreams is not attainable upon earth. Whatever the exertions that may be made to ameliorate the lot of man here below, none can succeed in eliminating from its suffering, sickness, and death. Sorrow and suffering are the portions of mankind. A life of peace and enjoyment is not for this world. True happiness is not to be found in sensual pleasures, but in God. While the whole world lasts, crime, vice, and poverty cannot be banished from it. Our Lord says, "The poor you will have with you always." John 12:8. And in regard to the proposed absorption of individual property by the state, this could not be accomplished without serious disturbances, for who would be willing to surrender his property without a struggle? And were community of goods once introduced, tranquility would not be obtained. The oppressed minority would, out of revenge, commit fearful outrages. Besides, laborious and industrious individuals would not be content, and they would gain nothing by their industry. Thus the working classes would lose instead of gaining. Socialistic theories could only be realized if men were like the lower animals, destitute of the love of liberty, and the desire for improvement. Socialism would cast a blight upon culture and destroy all stimulus, all motives for exercise of inventive genius. Few would exert themselves to make progress and aim at perfection if they knew their achievements would bring them no reward. The socialistic republic would all be slaves. Very true. Don't believe me? Visit your local housing projects. Your local housing projects. No man would exert himself to do better than another if he knew all was provided for him. There would be a premium upon slothfulness and negligence. Experience has shown that evils brought upon mankind by the examples of communities which had all their goods in common, and which have been noted for their crimes, and have come to an ignominious end. But although the dreams of the socialists are mere fantasies of the brain, yet they wouldn't be for long. Like much else that is undesirable, they are not without a certain use. As the hurricane tears down what is rotten and crazy, so socialism points out the weak points in social structure and compares our rulers to institute needful reforms. Well, it didn't work so well that way. Attention has been drawn preeminently to the extortion of labor by the capitalists, and the claims of the poor are brought into notice. Yet the harms done by socialists is far greater than any possible good it may directly or indirectly produce. All who endeavor by unlawful means to deprive their neighbor of his personal property live in a state of mortal sin. That's the big thing behind "thou shalt not steal." Okay? The mere fact of coveting what belongs to another is a sin. That's why covetousness and theft and adultery all go hand in hand. The mere fact of coveting what belongs to another is a sin. We know that all sin brings others in their train, and this is no exception to this rule. St. Paul says the inordinate desire of money is the root of all evils, 1 Timothy 6:10, and the utterances of socialists at their gathering prove the truth of these words. Their speeches are often abound with virulent attacks upon all in authority, on the Pope, on priests, and civil magistrates. Some go so far as to assert that perjury in a court of law is permissible if it furthers their own interests. That's actually one of the tenets of communism and socialism. I mean, that's, Marx said it, and they all pretty much go in for that, as far as I know. We know the crimes of which anarchists have been guilty: dynamite outrages and assassinations. At this point, they were setting off a lot of bombs and shooting people. That's what led up to the revolutions. Let it not be said in behalf of their principles, the Socialists, that the early Christians had all things in common, for the voluntary sharing of goods is quite different to what the Socialists propose to enforce. The fundamental principle of Christian charity, which urges almsgiving, is this: brother, what is mine is thine. Whereas the Socialist says, brother, what is thine is mine. In other words, charity is when you share what you have. Socialism is when you force someone to give you what they have at the point of a gun. It's the only difference between robbery is an individual with a gun as opposed to the state taking it through taxation or confiscation. But at the end, the enforcement the enforcement is always carried through at the point of a gun. Don't believe me? Try not to pay your taxes. Someone's going to come to your house and arrest you. If you resist arrest, what's going to happen? A gun. Again, the Socialists point to religious orders where all property is of the community. They say what is possible for them is possible for the state of the future. There is, however, no analogy between the two. For voluntary poverty and obedience form the basis of religious life, while in the state of the future sensual gratifications are to be encouraged. There is, however, no analogy between the two. For voluntary poverty and obedience form the basis for religious life, while in the state of future sensual gratifications are to be encouraged and enjoyed. That is a tongue twister and a half for some reason. I don't know why I'm stumbling over this, but what they're saying is the religious give up their belongings. They become willingly impoverished, looking forward to a future reward in heaven. Whereas in the state, all one has, or in the view of the socialist, all one has is the sensual gratifications of this life. And I think we're going to wrap it up there, since I am getting so tongue-tied. And that actually does conclude the Ten Commandments in this section. We will begin on what the commandments mean for us, what they require of us, in our next podcast with the works of mercy. And this follows naturally on to this subject we discussed today. It falls very naturally in here, but it really does relate to the whole body of the Ten Commandments. So y'all, remember the words of St. Padre Pio: pray, hope, and don't worry, and I will talk to you next time.